Namaste and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Education Day 2021 lecture on the theme, the National Education Policy and the Future of Indian Universities. This special webinar is being hosted by the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building at OP Jindal Global University. As many of you already know, the National Education Day is celebrated in India to commemorate the birth anniversary of India's first Education Minister, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. This year, 2021, marks the 134th birth anniversary of Maulana Azad. He was a key educationist who played an important role in developing the education system in independent India. He served as the first education minister of independent India from 1947 to 1958. Prior to that, he was a fearless freedom fighter and a strong voice against Hindu-Muslim communal disharmony. Azad was awarded the Bharat Ratna in 1992 for his contribution both as an educationist and as a freedom fighter. He strongly advocated education for women and compulsory education for all till the age of 14. He was also very much engaged with the higher education sector and was responsible for the establishment of the Indian Institute of Technologies and was also behind the establishment of Jamia Millia Islamia University. Educationists should build the capacities of the spirit of inquiry, creativity, entrepreneurial, and moral leadership among students and become their role model, said Maulana Azad. Hence, I would now like to invite a renowned educationist who has built capacities of the spirit of inquiry, creativity, entrepreneurial, and moral leadership among students and has become a role model for education reformers in contemporary India. Professor C. Rajkumar, the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University, to deliver the first National Education Day Lecture 2021. Over to you, Professor Rajkumar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mukherjee. First of all, let me recognize the presence of Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes, the Regional Director of MENA and South Asia at Quacquarelli Symonds, Professor Dr. INDU SHAHANI, the founding president of Atlas SkillTech University, Mumbai, my dear colleague, Dr. MOUSUMI MUKHERJEE, Associate Professor and Deputy Director of the International Institute of Higher Education Research and Capacity Building at OP Jindal Global University, my distinguished colleague, Professor DABIRU PATNAIK, the Registrar of OP Jindal Global University. Good evening to everybody, including my colleagues, faculty members, students, staff, and others, ladies and gentlemen, who are watching this over Facebook and YouTube. I thank all of you for joining us here today for the National Education Day Lecture 2021 on the theme, the National Education Policy and the Future of Indian Universities. My special gratitude to our guest of honor, Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes, Dr. INDU SHAHANI, for taking time out of your schedule to celebrate this important milestone for the Indian education landscape. Now, we are all gathered here today to mark India's National Education Day. This day is celebrated to mark the 134th birth anniversary of an extraordinary freedom fighter, a truly remarkable individual who had a far-sighted vision for transforming the Indian higher education and Indian education sector, Mr. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who was a renowned freedom fighter, journalist, social reformer, and indeed an educationist. Maulana Azad was one of the tallest leaders of India's freedom struggle and contributed immensely to establishing India's secular democratic foundations and a modern educational curriculum for a newly independent India. As the first education minister of independent India, serving in the role from 1947 to 1958, he played an active role in developing a full-fledged education system in the young country's early years. He was instrumental in the establishment of agencies such as the United University Grants Commission, which is the regulatory body for all higher education institutions. He led from the front efforts to establish Jamia Millia Islamia in Delhi and the Indian Institute of Technology and many other institutions. He also established the Board for Adult Education, a subject matter of great importance in recent times, and that was relevant even then. His passionate advocacy of education for women and free and compulsory education for children up to the age of 14 years made him an agent of change and social transformation. I cannot stress enough upon the importance of his contribution and legacy to the field of Indian education, for which he was quite appropriately and most deservingly posthumously awarded the Bharat Ratna, the highest civilian award of the country, in 1992. Let us befittingly remember his words on the importance of education in an individual's life, and I quote, "We must not for a moment forget it is a birthright for every individual to receive at least the basic education without which he or she cannot fully discharge his or her duties as a citizen," unquote. Maulana Azad's contributions, however, are not limited to the field of education alone. He was one of the stalwarts of India's freedom struggle. He spoke truth to power and effectively used his pen to expose the fault lines in the British government's policies in India. He was also a strong exponent of establishing India as a secular democratic country, for he believed in the pluralistic character of our society. He promoted quite vehemently and in a very passionate manner the coexistence of various religious communities. He was, of course, deeply troubled by the violence that followed the partition of Indian subcontinent, and traveled extensively to those violence-hit areas, providing aid and helping setting up camps for the affected people. Therefore, today is an important day to celebrate his life and his contributions, and more importantly, to use it as an inspiration to continue to transform the future of India through education. The theme of today's lecture, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the national education policy. We've just celebrated the first anniversary of the launch of the NEP in 2020, and we are moving forward in those in many directions to advance and fulfill the vision of NEP. But the focus of the lecture also will be to talk about the implementation of the NEP and also how NEP has the potential to impact the future of Indian universities. It has been over a year since the Government of India announced one of its most transformative public policy initiatives, the National Education Policy 2020, whose vision states, and I quote, "This policy envisions a complete overhaul and re-energizing of the higher education system to overcome these challenges and thereby deliver high-quality higher education with equity and inclusion. The main thrust of this policy regarding higher education is to end the fragmentation of higher education by transforming higher education institutions into large multidisciplinary universities, colleges, and higher education clusters and knowledge hubs," unquote. Clearly, the vision of NEP is to reimagine higher education and indeed transform the future of universities. The National Education Policy 2020 has indeed heralded a new imagination for Indian higher education system. It has created an inspiring vision that has the potential to build and nurture world-class universities and higher education institutions in India. However, this vision depends on our ability and commitment to the pursuit of systemic, synchronous, and sustainable reforms as envisaged in the policy. An equally important aspect of the higher education vision can and should be is what the Honorable Prime Minister of India had envisaged, the evolution of what he had called the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Also, as the world is slowly coming out of the pandemic, universities are retooling their vision, reimagining their mission, and indeed recreating a new governance paradigm whereby the safety, security, and well-being of the university community ought to be the paramount concern. It is also important that their future viability as institutions of higher learning evolves to meet with the realities of the post-pandemic world. Thus, this present time is an opportune moment for us to embrace the policy to improve the quality of higher education, to add more social relevance, and to ensure a correlation between the imparted knowledge and the required skills that are essential for pursuing meaningful opportunities for the future. Let me first articulate a 10-point summary of the National Education Policy 2020. Allow me to take a moment to give you a bird's eye view of the 10 most important and salient features of the National Education Policy 2020. First, it has envisaged a multidisciplinary, holistic, and liberal education. It has referred to the importance of literary works such as Kadambari in Banabata, as per which good education is defined by knowledge of the 64 kalas. It has emphasized the study of arts in the development of well-rounded students. It has also emphasized the need for balance of scientific fields, vocational fields, professional fields, liberal arts, and even soft skills. Hence, the dichotomy of higher education in India, university education in India, has been challenged quite substantially in the NEP. The second big thing that the NEP has promoted is it's brought the students to the center of the future policy making. It has enhanced student experience. It has envisaged the students to be at the center of the future of education. This aspect of students being at the center has been addressed by addressing the underlying constraints in improving the student experience, the need for development of curriculum, examination system, pedagogy, scholarships, internationalization, emotional and physical well-being, all of which have been addressed by the NEP 2020. The third important idea that the NEP has promoted is about the faculty development and faculty education. It has highlighted the importance and role of faculty in higher education, need for faculty autonomy, transparent recruitment, and career development opportunities, which will make academia as a preferred choice for bright people to come in and to contribute towards advancement of higher education. It has also emphasized the need for process improvement in teaching education to attract better talent into the education sector, with a stronger reference to the situation that prevails in many universities across India. The fourth aspect of the national education policy is about the development of a research ecosystem. It has highlighted the role of research productivity and innovation in the nation building process. It has talked about a transparent and a more well-funded research ecosystem through what has been recognized as one of the landmark initiative in the form of creation of a national research foundation. It has also talked about a substantial increase in the GDP investment with regard to higher education, which will have a direct impact on the future of Indian universities. The fifth aspect of the NEP is about regulatory reforms and autonomy. The NEP has in many ways addressed a major challenge in Indian higher education, which is that we may have ended up becoming over-regulated and under-governed. It has identified key reforms to streamline the management of regulation, establishing bodies with independent roles, and eliminate any conflict of interest. It has used the word, and I quote, light but tight regulations to provide higher education institutions and faculty that decide autonomy. The sixth aspect of the NEP is about balancing equity and quality. It has balanced the issues of equity and quality, which are so central to the future of universities. It has addressed issues surrounding reforms, focusing on curriculum and academic revisions. It has also emphasized on how to make our higher education institutions and its curriculum more inclusive and accessible. And there are reforms relating to language and to what extent language can play a very important role in promoting inclusion and access has also been emphasized in the NEP. The seventh aspect of the NEP is about the idea of consolidation of higher education institutions. The fact is, India today has nearly 1,000 plus universities, over 50,000 colleges, and this has been recognized as a major challenge of management and governance. It has recognized the need for a formation of multidisciplinary university systems, or what is known as higher education clusters, which will provide greater and more effective leadership and institutional governance for these large number of institutions spread across the country. And consolidation becomes a critical aspect of the future. The eighth aspect of NEP is about public funding and private philanthropy. It has recognized the need for strengthening the framework for funding to enable greater investment in higher education and private philanthropy. It has recognized the future of public-private collaboration, which is so critical for building the future university. The ninth aspect of the national education policy talks about governance and leadership. It has highlighted the importance of governance and leadership in the administration and institution building efforts. It has recognized the role of the Board of Governors and the need for its autonomy. It has also focused on the need for having a vision of higher education institutions in the format of well-developed institutional development plans that ought to drive and inform the future of Indian higher education. The 10th aspect of NEP is something that many of us in the higher education sector has been talking about, which is internationalization, accreditation, and digital learning. It has focused on strengthening the growth of internationalization and global partnerships with leading universities around the world. It has also talked about accreditation and high performance of universities, including the role of international rankings. It has also recognized the need for providing significant support for online distance learning and indeed the digitization of higher education in enabling greater equity and access to education has been emphasized. So the national education policy is a comprehensive, compelling, deeply thoughtful and engaging and inspiring document. It has challenged the higher education community, including universities, vice chancellors, principals of colleges, heads of departments, deans of schools, and of course the regulatory bodies and government agencies, that are we prepared to transform the Indian higher education system. Now the question is, let's talk about to what extent we are prepared in terms of implementing these far-sighted reforms that the national education policy has envisaged. First, let us understand where we stand in terms of the progress we have made since the birth of this visionary policy. In the run-up to the launch of the national education policy, wide-ranging consultative exercise was held in the last 1 year. However, the complexity of the education sector requires internalizing the wisdom of the NEP by all stakeholders. The two major initiatives that were promoted include the strengthening of online education and establishing an academic bank of credit. We also witnessed extraordinary innovations in the use of technology and technological platforms to offer academic programs. Talking about the two major initiatives that were promoted during the last year, including strengthening of the online education system and establishing an academic bank of credit. We also witnessed extraordinary innovations in the use of technology and technological platforms to offer academic programs. Of course, while our digital divide is a continuing challenge in access to education, it has also been the only mode of education that was feasible and democratic during the pandemic. The seriousness in which the government of India has approached the formulation of the NEP was also equally matched with the impetus provided by the highest echelons of the government, including discussions led by the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Education Minister, and many others in leading the regulatory bodies within the government of India, underscoring the significance of the national education policy. Let me move on to how we shape the future. Now, I believe there are 5 institutional mechanisms that are critical for us to shape the future. So as we go forward, we must acknowledge that the national education policy expects the highest degree of operational governance as far as its implementation is concerned. Many good policies run the risk of poor implementation if efforts are not taken to develop robust mechanisms for operational governance. An important aspect of policy implementation is the level of institutional preparedness within all relevant organizations. Distinguished scholars Michael Hill and Peter Hupe, senior scholars in social policy and governance, in their most influential book, Implementing Public Policy, an introduction to the study of operational governance, have observed, and I quote, "Designing institutions is an important public task. Implementation then refers to that part of governance that involves activities in relation to public tasks that follow the legitimate directive decisions on those tasks. In the beginning of the 3rd millennium, the implementation of public policy takes various forms, but they can all be approached as concerned with the operational part of governance. In short, implementation can be seen as operational governance," unquote. Therefore, as we look towards the next phase of the National Education Policy 2020 implementation, it is important that we put in place the following 5 institutional mechanisms under the aegis of the proposed national education policy for ensuring robust governance of the policy implementation. And I propose these 5 mechanisms. First, interministerial coordination for implementing the national education policy. There are many aspects of the NEP that requires participation and involvement of other ministries and departments beyond the Ministry of Education within the Government of India. This requires a continuous coordination and monitoring mechanism to ensure that the issues leading to the timely implementation of the NEP are urgently addressed. 2, interregulatory body coordination for implementing the NEP. The higher education sector has more than 15 discipline-based regulatory bodies, such as the Council of Architecture, the Medical Council of India, the Bar Council of India, and many other important bodies, all of whose functioning impinges on the vision articulated in the national education policy. There is an urgent need for a strong and substantive engagement with all these regulatory bodies for effective coordination for implementing the national education policy. Number 3, intra-governmental coordination for implementing the NEP. It is important that any effective institutional mechanism is designed to connect and collaborate higher education departments and the state higher education councils of state governments. Removing duplication while delineating roles and responsibilities of institutions that are involved within a state government will be the key and a part of the policy making, which is also extremely difficult. 4, funding and resource allocation for implementing the NEP. While every public policy making is a very difficult effort, one thing is certain, that it requires resources. The issue of funding and resource allocation is almost central to the successful implementation of the NEP. The funding authority should be empowered to ensure that they are able to work with all government departments to ensure that the necessary funds are available in a timely manner. 5, statutory legal reforms for implementing the national education policy. Certain areas of the NEP require legal and statutory support. The regulatory body should be working to identify these aspects of the NEP to initiate reforms at the earliest opportunity. It is important that all efforts are undertaken with the necessary legal and statutory frameworks in place for effective implementation of the NEP. We are all familiar with the fact that those stay orders from courts across India can play a very significant adverse role when it comes to policy implementation, and we need to be conscious of the legal and institutional mechanism that backs the policy and that needs to be put in place. So, as we discuss the future of universities in India, I can think of a 3-point agenda that will help us in formulating a vision for the future of universities in India. Also, keeping in mind the diversity in the Indian higher education landscape and the complexity that comes with this diversity, I would like to propose the following 3-point agenda that we must keep in mind. First, the higher education institution should be empowered to take complete ownership and assume leadership in the implementation of the NEP. This is absolutely essential. The nature of policy implementation requires empowerment at the ground level, and the NEP is no different. Number 2, strong institutional incentives should be developed to promote the implementation of the NEP. Incentives could be financial, but need not be limited only to that. The concept of graded autonomy that was promoted by the Government of India could be linked to the effective implementation of the NEP. Additionally, the vision of institutions of eminence need to be integrated with the NEP implementation plan, and the IOEs need to be empowered with more freedom, flexibility, autonomy, and resources to realize their aspirations of building India's world-class universities. This will in due course help Indian universities to have a robust presence in the global rankings of universities as well. 3, while empowerment of the higher education institutions and provision of incentives will form core of the plan of action, these efforts need to be continuously monitored and assessed. but the monitoring and feedback mechanisms involving quasi-governmental organizations such as the Association of Indian Universities and many other organizations could be extremely valuable. So let me move to the next part of my lecture, which is about the future of Indian universities. I strongly believe that the future of Indian universities is going to be enormously shaped by the social and institutional expectations that is generated by the young people of India. I would like to propose the following 10-point framework to enable success for the future of Indian universities and achieve the vision outlined in the NEP 2020. These are as follows. First, a significant promotion of the idea of not-for-profit and philanthropic universities. And why do we do that? Well, cost centers of a university are a serious matter. To have a world-class university needs investment on multiple areas: recruitment of faculty and staff, funding for research, support for research centers, creation of incubation centers, development of physical infrastructure, use of technology, provision of holistic learning and student experiences on campus and beyond, and international opportunities for students. Funding essentially comes from three different sources. First, the government, which is the taxpayers' money, could contribute. Second, the users or consumers or beneficiaries of education can pay for it, or philanthropists who can subsidize that cost because many people cannot access, can contribute. And that is why I strongly believe that we need to promote philanthropy. Exclusive dependence on the government, including for public universities, for all financial resources, have contributed to limiting the capacity of funding that could be available for public universities. I also feel that the privatization of higher education in India should not be driven by profit, but to be driven by philanthropy. Often it is unfortunately driven by commercial and for-profit interests. It's equally important to talk about the leadership crisis that is prevailing in Indian universities, and we need to recognize that and contribute to that change. So as I look at the future, when we talk about the idea of a not-for-profit philanthropic university, we need to recognize and radically re-examine the funding framework. We need to draw inspiration from global universities and make them as role models. Philanthropy includes harnessing individual, institutional, and corporate philanthropy, but also we need to focus on how the corporate social responsibility funding can be useful and can be impactful in building the future of Indian universities. The second aspect of the future of Indian universities is about academic freedom and institutional autonomy. Challenges for academic freedom and institutional autonomy are coming from different directions. Multiple stakeholder issue is a major problem, including regulatory bodies, Ministry of Education, NITI Aayog, multiple numerous bodies, state councils for higher education, and of course, courts as well. Each of them have their own perspectives on what ought to be the future of higher education, and multiple perspectives are being brought to the table when it comes to discussing the future. We need to promote balancing consensus, ensuring a balance between consensus building and academic freedom and autonomy. We also need to be conscious of the mediocrity that is being embedded in Indian higher education and how we can overcome that by faculty members and universities taking more responsibility. In some ways, the future to achieve academic freedom and institutional autonomy is about recognizing its impact in the wider world of universities. It should not conform to short-term indicators or metrics alone. Emphasizing on academic freedom, balance with transparency and accountability ought to be the norm. It should address the criticality of accountability in the context of growing commercialization of education. Academic freedom is about social responsibility. It's about institutional governance, both of which are critical for the future of Indian universities. We also need to recognize that the state has a role and responsibility in protecting academic freedom. It should not be limited to being discreet and exercising self-restraint in its possible interventions. Academic freedom is a human right, engaging the democratic process and empowering function that should be the goal of all forms of attempts to build universities. We need to create space for opportunities to think and reflect about new ideas that can be transformative, and that's where universities play a very significant role. The third aspect of the future is about multidisciplinary education and interdisciplinary learning. Now, the NEP has talked about it. Diverse perspectives are needed to resolve complex problems. We know that to navigate the complexities of life in the 21st century world, especially the post-pandemic world, university students need to develop deep interest in not only the substantive aspects of their study and profession, but also wider aspects of their practices. Interdisciplinary problem solving should enable youth with the ability to deal with problems that are by definition truly interdisciplinary. How to synthesize from a range of perspectives, reduce ambiguities without necessarily not leading to useful conclusions and solutions to the problem. In fact, to build interdisciplinarity in the curriculum and to the process, we need to focus on institutional governance and to what extent the universities are ready and willing to make that commitment. The fourth aspect of the future is about having a transparent admissions process. The heart of universities is based upon the foundations of trust and faith on the governance system of a university. Having a transparent admissions process is a sine qua non for the future of Indian universities. Fifth, internationalization at the heart of institutional building. I talked about it earlier, but as I look at the future, the Indian student is increasingly wanting to be part of a global conversation. India as a country is wanting to be part of a global conversation. In many ways, internationalization has been a part of our history and evolution. The early institutions of the world, which were in the Indian subcontinent, including Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallabhi, and Vikramshila, were truly international universities. They had students and faculty from different parts of the world. They were multidisciplinary in nature. We need to draw that heritage and that history when we think about the future, where internationalization ought to be at the heart of institution building. There are different forms of international collaborations, and I don't want to go into the length of it, but the heart of it is both students and faculty across Indian universities need to be given an opportunity to connect to the world at large. The sixth aspect of the future is about the ability and capacity for hiring outstanding faculty who are inspiring teachers and prolific researchers. Building world-class universities is about attracting high-quality talent from India and from around the world. We need to focus on that aspect of attracting talent, as universities are about ideas that are taught in the classroom, ideas that are written about, which leads to research and scholarship, and in that process, change. In many ways, hiring and attracting talent in a university is the most important role and leadership responsibility that vice chancellors and presidents of universities undertake along with deans, and this is part of an effort to create an institution of global excellence. 7, something that all of us have lamented about, the building a culture of research and publications. We have with us today Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes, and he and his colleagues will tell us that one of the reasons why Indian universities are not among the leading universities in the world is that we don't have a culture of research and publications. We need to emphasize that in our university governance. We need to recognize that scholarship and publications and research led by faculty and contributions by students will ultimately help to shape the future of Indian universities. 8 is something that we know, but we have not done enough, which is about benchmarking and institutionalizing accreditation. This accreditation and processes leading to accreditation, ultimately even rankings, are part of an effort to improve quality. These are not just external validation tools, but are useful aspects of internal governance in which how we can improve our own performance could be measured through evidence and through measurable indicators. I want to mention that as we look at the future, the focus on building institutional mechanisms within the university setting for promoting accreditation and rankings, as well as benchmarking with universities around the world, ought to become a policy priority. The ninth aspect of the future is about promoting diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and community engagement. Each of those words are so critical for the future of Indian universities, as they are essential part of any university system. And a country like India, as diverse as it is, as complex as it is, we need to place emphasis on universities becoming more and more democratic and more inclusive. The last bit is about developing active participation of all stakeholders for the governance of Indian universities, something that we have done very little in the past. We need to recognize that public or private university distinction is not important. All universities, in my view, are part of the public character. They are expected to contribute to common good. They are contributing to public service. Regardless of the funding characteristics which determine the public or private character of a university, ultimately, universities are serving society at large, and that's why they require active participation of all stakeholders. So, as I conclude, I would like to say that this significant day, being the National Education Day, let us celebrate the vision of the Atmanirbhar University and an Atmanirbhar higher education system in India. It envisions India to evolve its existing setup and develop world-class higher education system which matches with the global standards of teaching and learning and establishes universities of global repute. But universities ought to be speaking truth to power, at times even causing discomfiture to the powers that be. Indian universities have the potential to transform the youth of India, to develop the economy of our nation and the society and the world around us. Universities also have the potential to engage in impact-driven research that is instrumental in making India a knowledge society. Thus, we must realize our potential to its fullest extent to achieve our goal to have a world-class higher education landscape in India. It's important that we acknowledge that India can fulfill this vision only if we are prepared to take full responsibility of what it takes to become an Atmanirbhar Bharat. As Maulana Abul Kalam Azad had said, and I quote, "Education imparted by heart can bring revolution in the society." So on his birth anniversary today, let us commit to a brand new revolution for the future of our nation, starting right here, right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Raj, for your reflections on the national education policy and the ideas that you have shared with all of us with regards to what needs to be done for successful implementation of the policy recommendations, which is always a major challenge. And we hope that these wise words and insights will be taken seriously, and education reformers and educators on the ground who are listening to you will take this forward. I would now like to invite Dr. INDU SHAHANI, our founding president of Atlas SkillTech University from Mumbai, to deliver the special address this evening celebrating the National Education Day. Over to you, Professor SHAHANI.
Very good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for inviting me today, Professor Rajkumar. It is indeed a pleasure, and especially on this very, very special day of National Education Day, which, you know, we have been, I'm glad that you reminded us and we are celebrating it this evening. And I must compliment the International Institute to Higher Education Research and Capacity Building for organizing this evening's program. So on this day, I think we all would like to remember Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who served as the first education minister when India got its independence. But I think what's more important is what he said. And as you know, we just saw Professor Rajkumar telling us that you know, education has to be from the heart. I like the way that the recent one that I read of Maulana Abdullah Kalam Azad's quotes was that educationists should build capabilities of the spirit of inquiry, creativity, entrepreneur, and moral leadership among students and become their role model. I think this is a beautiful saying because it really tugs at my heart, because today education is all about inquiry, creativity, entrepreneurship, and moral leadership. So I think on this day, it is indeed a pleasure for me to speak and talk about the future of universities. But at this time, could I first just say, let's take a moment to remember what happened in the last 2 years, when the 2020 and of course the 2021 that's going on. Everything came to a standstill, as we are all aware of, and the pandemic was not only a health crisis and an economic crisis, but I think it was more a social crisis, and of course, it put an abrupt halt to the regular schools and colleges. You know, Gordon Brown has said that you can survive 40 days without food. You can survive 8 days without water, and you can survive 8 minutes without air, but you cannot survive for a second without, do I have to ask everyone what that is? Hope. And I think it was hope that kept us going. And I'm sure in education especially, it was hope that actually made the pandemic a perfect storm, because it linked pedagogy, it linked learning outcomes, and it linked technology. While schools and colleges were closed, learning did not stop. And I think that was something that really helped young students. Of course, they had to use technology, and amazing technology supported amazing teachers. So on this beautiful day, let us pay a tribute to all the wonderful teachers who went virtual and carried on the teaching and learning process. I'm going to really talk about the future of universities, but from my own personal experience. I've had about 40 years of experience in higher education, and initially, you know, many years, over 25 years as a principal of a leading college in University of Mumbai. But I have to say that I would really, you know, every day get up in the morning and say, maybe someday we will be able to change a lot that needs to be done. Because I would see 19th century curriculum taught by 20th century faculty to the 21st century students. And I wanted, you know, and at that time, had I met Professor Rajkumar, I think we would have shaken up the 19th century curriculum as he has done now, and gave me the inspiration to do that currently in my new institutions. So we had institutions, and we had schools of design, innovation, we had schools of filmmaking, animation, schools of media communication, management, entrepreneurship. And when the pandemic came, it was time to reflect. And the time to reflect was, how do we reimagine this education? How do we really look at the future? How do we reinvent education and how do we reboot education in this digital world. And so the reimagination was all about, we started looking at what is it that the employers are looking for? What is it that the world wanted? And one word that became an absolute mantra, whether it was education, whether it was your homes, or whether it was the industry, one word that became the mantra was resilience. And I think resilience and agility was something that we all needed to arm our students with. And that became our first, absolutely focused to see that are we really giving them the skills of the future and are making them highly agile and resilient. According to the World Economic Forum, as we all know, it is said that 65% of the jobs of the future will be new and which will need special skills. I'm just going to give you one example. The other day, I had a group of, top group of advertising media, digital media, advertising companies, and we had a roundtable conference, and they said, these are the jobs we are looking for your schools from media and communication. And please put your hand on your heart and tell me how many of you had ever heard of these jobs. Data ethnographer, purpose planner, neuro A/B tester, mood empathy manager, sentimental analyst, sixth sense analyst, machine personality designer. And I said, oh my gosh, what is this? This is the new world and the new jobs that are coming up. And are we giving them the digital skills? And then I said, can you tell us what the digital skills are? And they said sense making, social intelligence, transdisciplinarity, virtual collaboration, cross-cultural competency, computational thinking, new media transparency, novel and adaptive thinking, design mindset, and cognitive load management. And we said, well, it's time that we really reimagine and think about different skills. And so a recent McKinsey study, which actually talked to such 18,000 employers in 15 different countries, came up with the new skills. And in conclusion, they came up with 56 skills, which they divided. And I'm not going through those 56 skills with you, but they divided into 4 major deltas. And those were, of course, on whether it could be any curriculum that you're teaching, but the 4 deltas that they talked about, and I think the future of universities will need to talk about, is self-leadership, digital, understanding, cognitive, and interpersonal skills. But they focused on saying that most of the universities are giving social, emotional, and advanced cognitive skills, but the skills that most universities are not able to give is the digital skills. And so it's time to reinvent the educational model for the 21st century so that we are able to, as Professor Rajkumar said, the multidisciplinary skills. I think we need to understand that information technology has to be and play an important role in the 4th industrial revolution. Therefore, at the schools, we thought about rebooting education. And how do you reboot education? In a world today which is becoming technology-driven, all I'm hearing from my students is AI, ML, IoT, and then the imagination of the industry also revolves around the same. So we said we must ride the tide of the digital transformation and create an ecosystem to skill the youth so that these emerging technologies can be taught to the students. And this would, of course, give India a growth trajectory, and therefore we are very happy to say and very humbled to say that the Maharashtra government and the industry supported us to start a new university, probably the first one of its kind, called the SkillTech University, and it is the state's private university. It is the one of its kind, developing new age skills and coupled with technology interventions, moving human to human, human to digital, and digital to human format. And the SkillTech University offers, as the NEP says, freedom to learners to curate their learnings path, at the same time involving and bringing about innovation, research, entrepreneurship, and inclusion. I think that is one of the most important things. We are not only looking at students for skilling them and for developing them for the jobs of the future, but also for self-motivation, for their self-growth, for their entrepreneurial jobs, and also helping with communities. We want to move the students from classrooms to their careers and to the communities so that they can bring in and help out with, again, Professor Rajkumar said, that there's a digital divide, and I think it's very important for students to understand this. So, having introduced now the new courses in design, innovation, management, entrepreneurship, fintech, new media communication, innovation, design, filmmaking, animation, and VFS, we've been able to bring in these differentiators in the SkillTech University. Choice-based courses to encourage interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary education. Industry integrated curriculum delivered to domain experts, delivered by domain experts. International exposure, again, which Professor Rajkumar emphasized through the NEP, through summer schools, exchanges, semester programs, and so on. State-of-art technology-enabled learning and campus infrastructure, simulations, virtual labs, capstones to enhance hands-on learning, live projects, internships, and on-the-job training to gain the real-world experience. Hopefully, the students should be studying more out of class and within the industry, and also training the teachers within industry to gain the real-world experience. Incubators, structured startup programs to nurture entrepreneurship, community projects which develop socially responsible leaders. And I would just say this has been very nicely summarized just in yesterday's newspaper by the HBS Dean, Harvard Business School Dean, Shrikant Datar, Professor Shrikant Datar, who has said that the universities of the future have to have 3 Ds. One, the first D is digital and technological transformation. The second D is data science. And the third D is design thinking. And I'm happy to say that we have been able to include all of this in our SkillTech University and provide a holistic, integrated, digital, flexible, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, engaging, and experiential education. But before I end, and I think at this time, as being one of India's youngest universities, I think it is now the responsibility of all the senior leaders, and especially Professor Rajkumar, to see that we also are given the same encouragement and support that all universities did get. We are happy to say that the UGC and the AIU and the international universities, since morning I've received some beautiful messages from international universities. I think it's time for India. If you know, I used to always say, if it's made in India, if it's skill India, if it's digital India, then why not study in India? And I'm sure this is something that we'll be able to do. And why just have partnerships for universities abroad? Why not have partnerships, even universities within India? And I'm happy to say that we look forward to this. But before I end, I want to say something. I want to read something that when I had read this particular article, I thought about what the students keep talking about. I don't know how many of you know about the metaverse and the meta world that the students are talking about. And so I thought it's time for us to introduce, if we are talking about the future, meta education. And when I read this, I thought it really would be a world that we hadn't seen. And I think the future of the universities would be very close to what I'm going to read out to you, which actually I read many years ago. And I never imagined that this would be the future. And now I can see that the reality would happen. And that is, digital learners will rebel against intellectual conformity, right? We can see that happening already. Learning avatars will be commonplace. You can see today the EdTech companies are probably the highest earners in this respect. Third, participative hubs will replace isolated classrooms. And I think that's what's already happening. And you know, while we are creating the university, we are creating infrastructure. More than giving emphasis to the classrooms, we are creating hubs outside classrooms so that students would be able to work on that. Inquiring skills, of course, this will always remain. Inquiring skills will drive learning. Capacities will matter more than grades. And very soon, degrees will not matter. It will be the skills that the students will bring to the workplace. And this one, the next one is interesting. And I think we're all moving towards that, and I hope we do. Teachers will become inventors. And I can see that teachers doing this in the classrooms. School leaders will have to give up their desks. And that's why you find Professor Rajkumar in his little pad and not in the university. He's already given up his desk. And so I would say, you know, we have to put up our desks in corridors. The school leaders have to put up their desks in corridors, because are we listening to Gen Z? This is one of the most important questions. Is our Indian universities, our Indian school leaders listening to Gen Z? So have a standing work table that you can move anywhere into your institution and work out of that. Students and families will become co-learners and co-creators. And I'm sure you've noticed that while in these last 2 years, so many parents attended our classes, right? Formal credentials will no longer be the holy grail. I talked about the degrees not being the holy grail. And finally, this is something that I think Professor Rajkumar is really waiting for. Policy makers will form communities of continuous improvement. And with this, I would say that let's hope this meta world becomes a reality. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Indusani, for sharing your thoughts on the future of Indian universities and excellent inputs on transition from higher education to workplace and the skills that are required for the 21st century workplace. Are we really educating our students and empowering them with these skills? It's something to seriously think about, and with the current national education policy mandate, we can always, as teachers, become innovators to really fulfill this meta world that you just described with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Sani. We are now going to move to Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes, who is going to deliver the presidential address. Dr. Fernandes is the Regional Director of Quacquarelli Symonds, MENA and South Asia region. Over to you, Dr. Fernandes.
Thank you so very much, and a very good evening to all the dignitaries, faculty members and students who have joined us for this lecture. First and foremost, thanks to Professor C. Rajkumar for inviting me, and for OP Jindal Global University and the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building for organizing this lecture. I'm deeply honored to be delivering this presidential address to you today on the National Education Day, which, as all of you already know, marks the birth anniversary of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. So thank you very much for having me today, and I'm completely blown away with Dr. INDU Shahani's lecture and all the amazing thoughts from Professor C. Rajkumar. So I will try to summarize a couple of things what I said in the earlier points, but definitely can't do justice to the two eloquent speakers before me. So thank you so very much for setting the tone, and I will try to conclude the session today with my thoughts. As it is the birthday of, or the National Education Day and the birthday of Maulana Azadji, I think it's apt to have a quote from him. And the quote which I have got here is, "Education is fundamental to building a human capital and an equitable society. The quality of an education system to a large extent determines innovation, economic growth, social justice, and equity in any country." It is so true. Our national education policy, which is in the second year, aims to attain a similar goal by making India a Vishwa Guru, a hub of knowledge and innovation. It also aspires to have 20 world-class universities in the top 100 of the world rankings. And I think coming from the ranking body itself, it's really amazing to see this a very transformative plan by the government. And today, as we stand at this juncture where NEP has got into the second year of implementation, I think this phase will be very critical to accomplish the reimagined, modern, progressive, and equitable education system we all want. As Professor Raj points out, the successful execution of this policy definitely will call for dramatic simplification of the decision-making structures, and definitely the reprioritization of budgetary resources on higher education. The ambitious growth and reform plans for Indian universities, and Prof. Raj has already mentioned the various, the future and his 10-point agenda, is perhaps the only way we have to achieve excellence and to move up in global rankings. Now, ultimately, rankings are not the goal, but the outcome of what we are doing as a country, as a knowledge hub. So for a $5 trillion economy, higher education will play a vital role, either as a research hub or as an investment hub or an income generator. So what are my takeaways as basic essentials to a successful implementation of the national education policy? And is so apt we're discussing this today. So definitely a successful implementation would mean we are building and nurturing world-class universities in India. So I will propose a 7-point agenda, which is a culmination of exactly what Professor Raj and Professor INDU SHAHANI has all said. So first is the most important, and from a global level, is transparency. So a transparent system, it is absolutely essential component of building a long-term and as well a credible institution. Given how the complex, the history and nature of Indian higher education system and how private universities have been in the past, the particular phase which we have, the challenge we face of poor perception of credibility, transparency, accountability, and repute have to be tackled. So a transparent and comprehensive information system, starting from as basic as programs, fees, application, procedures, and scholarship information, will definitely encourage applications from students from diverse geographical and socioeconomic backgrounds. I believe that such system will be vital in ensuring that equity and access are prioritized and institutionalized within the Indian higher education institutions. The second, as mentioned previously, is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary education. So the leading universities of the world have demonstrated a deep, persistent, and sustained commitment to interdisciplinarity. So institutional mechanisms need to be established now, today, this year, not tomorrow, within universities to promote students to learn across the entire university. There also needs to be, we also need to provide adequate resources for faculty to undertake cross-disciplinary research, not just teaching, but also cross-disciplinary research. So the NEP in this case emphasizes on this holistic and multidisciplinary approach and research. The policy also stresses on the overall and holistic development with cross-disciplinary and outcome-based education. And I think you probably heard this many times before, the academic bank of credit, and we keep talking about it at a national level, will definitely, if implemented well, will provide flexibility in acquiring degrees and providing multiple exit entry point options at all levels of education. The third most important is internationalization. We have seen and heard multiple times, I think it's so important. Study abroad, exchange programs, winter and summer schools, dual degrees and joint degrees, both will serve as an important way for students and participants to expand their understanding and overcome the prejudices of other cultures. I mean, India requires more people to come in on short-term visits to experience what the true India is, not what the media is telling you. So definitely gaining access to diverse views through young people coming to India to the short-term programs and learning new contexts will be really important in the future. In addition, I think cultivating an alumni base which can provide guide and mentors for young and current students seeking short and long-term opportunities abroad is required. And I think the NEP's vision as well of bringing top universities to India to open offshore campuses will support this, will offer alignment with international pedagogy and standards, and definitely allow Indian institutions to collaborate and perhaps get international adjunct faculty to start with perhaps, and international students from these universities to come into Indian institutions. The fourth, what's also important is freedom. Given the challenges of mediocrity in higher education, there's an urgent need for emphasis on academic freedom as a core component of ensuring high academic standards and the development of curriculum that will meet the needs of the future. The concept of academic freedom should not should be examined in the current light of globalization. I think at the same time, we should not forget autonomy, which should resonate with the freedom in contexts such as curriculum reconceptualization, academic research policies, academic or entrance standards, and academic staff appointments at the institutions. So all of this, along with the merger of the multiple regulators of higher education, we have the UGC, AICTE, MCI, BCI, and all of them merged into the Higher Education Commission of India as a single regulator is definitely going to bring substantial change in the field. The fifth most important fundamental aspect is funding and research. You can name the activity. Either it is recruitment of faculty and staff, funding for research, support for research centers, creation of incubation centers, development of physical infrastructure, use of technology, provision of holistic learning and student experiences in the campus and beyond, as well as international opportunities for students, all require significant funding. So the government, besides, we have always said and reiterated that the percentage of GDP on higher education should increase, but at the same time, creating the ecosystem for philanthropy and corporate social responsibility is really where India needs to look at the West and bring that system into India, so it incentivizes companies for funding to universities. So this is really an important takeaway, which can support research, not just in the sciences, but in all the areas of arts and humanities and management and natural sciences and so on. The sixth area is governance. World-class universities can be developed and nurtured not only when institutions have an independent and transparent governance mechanism, but also providing the accountability and transparency for institutions to make, do, and provide stakeholders with all the information that's required, and not particularly holding them accountable by private versus public, as previously mentioned. And the seventh most important area, which I will conclude with, is quality measurement. The most important, I think, so coming from a quality assessment agency like QS, there is a serious need for Indian institutions to be in the rankings and be top in the rankings, not because we want to be top, but this will fuel a lot of other areas we've talked about in the 6 areas before. So definitely the urgency for seeking reforms that will pave the way for promoting excellence in higher education and research. It's important for Indian institutions to start right now embracing the international ranking frameworks, embracing international accreditations, which will help benchmark Indian institutions with world-class institutions. And I think the QS rankings have demonstrated the fact that higher education's needs in India needs to be overhauled to compete with that of the world, where we have academic freedom, innovation, intellectual freedom, and research excellence, which are constantly being promoted. It is also noted that India needs to focus on not just improving the research. We do have, I mean, for your information, we have one institution from India, which is already ranked #1 in the world for research. But we need to focus on improving the academic reputation, which portrays the views and perspectives of fellow academics globally who are producing similar research in their areas. So in conclusion, higher education systems across the world are definitely in transition. The intensification of globalization, the changes with technology, which Professor INDU mentioned, the shift in demographic profiles, the ease of mobility of human and financial capital, and the changes in perception have definitely made it imperative that we must reimagine the role of universities and higher education and to align them with the current trends. NEP is aimed to revamp higher education in India. We also need the right systems in place. And as mentioned by Prof. Raj, the establishment of the various committees, the various empowered task forces, which actually would oversee and measure whatever is essential is really important. So the reforms suggested for improving quality education and bringing it to international standards, along with the emphasis on lifelong learning, is definitely bound to bring revolutionary and innovative changes. And if implemented correctly, it has got everything we need to make India a Vishwaguru by 2030. Thank you so very much. And I hope I've tried to summarize all of that in the presidential address. So thank you so much, and glad to be here.
Thank you, Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes, for sharing your thoughts, particularly with regards to improvement in quality. of delivery of higher education and quality assurance mechanisms, some things we really need to work on within the larger Indian context, and there's a lot of room for improvement. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, valuable insights. I'm sure that's going to guide the reformers within institutions. I would now like to invite for delivering the concluding remarks, the registrar of our university, OP Jindal Global University, Professor DABIRU SRIDHAR PATNAIK, to take lead now. Over to you, Professor Patnaik.
Thank you very much, Professor MOUSUMI MUKHERJEE. Professor C. Rajkumar, Founding Vice Chancellor of the OP Jindal Global University, Professor INDU SHAHANI, Founding President, Atlas SkillTech University, Mumbai, Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes, Regional Director, MENA in South Asia, Quacquarelli, Symonds, Dr. MOUSUMI MUKHERJEE, Associate Professor and Deputy Director of the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building at the OP Jindal Global University, distinguished invitees, deans of all schools and university offices at the JGU, the directors of JGU-wide research institutes, faculty and staff members, students, their parents, and most importantly, the representatives from the Niti Aayog, Ministry of Education, Government of India, the Department of Higher Education, Government of Haryana, the Haryana State Higher Education Council, the University Grants Commission, the representatives from the Association of Indian Universities, the Bar Council of India, and the Council of Architecture, and the AICTE, and all other important regulatory agencies and education leaders from India and around the world. Good evening, everyone. Let me begin by saying that there can be no better way to honor the contributions of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad than by conducting a commemorative lecture on the occasion of his birth anniversary, which is celebrated as the National Education Day. As the lead speaker, Professor C. Rajkumar, and other distinguished speakers, Professor INDU SHAHANI and Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes had mentioned, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was one of those personalities who recognized possibilities for the 21st century education. He stood for a learning society through liberal, modern, and universal education, combining the values of Indian arts and the rationalism of Western sciences. He thought of a society where the youth is disciplined and the women lead a life of dignity. He was the first person who raised the issue of the national system of education, which was the bedrock of the 1986 national policy on education that served the nation for more than 3 decades before bringing into place the NEP, or the National Education Policy 2020. On this occasion, I congratulate the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building of JGU for convening the lecture on a timely topic, and I appreciate the efforts of the leadership that includes Professor C. Rajkumar and Professor MOUSUMI MUKHERJEE and all other distinguished team members of the IIHEd. On this significant occasion, I would like to thank in particular Professor C. Rajkumar, the Founding Vice Chancellor and Director, IIHEd, for his inaugural lecture on National Education Day. Professor Rajkumar has always inspired us with his views on the future of Indian universities. Today, we all are once again delighted to hear his inspirational, thoughtful, and enriching perspectives on the eve of National Education Day. These comprehensive thoughts are a roadmap or a method for institution building. With all humility, I can say that JGU, or the OP Jindal Global University, epitomizes the characteristics of the national education policy and what universities ought to do progressively to achieve excellence. We express our deep sense of gratitude to our Vice Chancellor, Professor C. Rajkumar, for his able leadership and singular commitment to the idea and functioning of the OP Jindal Global University and in steering the university's efforts towards achieving academic excellence, which today stands as the best private university in India. We are indeed fortunate that Professor INDU SHAHANI has delivered the special address and shared her experiences and reflections on education and determinants to usher in changes and reboot higher education in India. I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor INDU SHAHANI for accepting the invitation and for her continuous support to the JGU fraternity. I would also like to thank Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes for accepting the invitation and for delivering the presidential address on this occasion. We are delighted to hear his thoughts on redefining the overall quality and accountability in higher education and how the National Education Policy 2020 could contribute to redefining the structure of the Indian higher education system so that Indian universities prominently figure in the world university rankings. On behalf of the JGU community, I wish to sincerely thank our Honorable Chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, for his dynamic and visionary leadership of the university and in setting an example in the country and acquiring a well-deserving reputation globally in terms of what he has contributed to the university as a philanthropic activity. JGU today stands as a testament to values espoused by Shri O.P. Jindal, who always believed that education, access, and opportunities could change the world and that students go on to become change makers, a cause that was championed by Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. We are grateful to our benefactor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, for establishing the O.P. Jindal Global University and for his unflinching support and continuous guidance over the years. In closing, I would like to say that the Indian higher education system is going through an important transition with the promulgation of institutions of eminence and also the National Education Policy 2020, amongst other important regulations. I'm pleased to report that the O.P. Jindal Global University was recognized as an institution of eminence in 2020. Also, I'm confident that through our efforts and commitment, we will be able to educate more and more young people and encourage them to work for a cohesive society and towards nation building. Therefore, this evening's National Education Day lecture is an opportunity to pledge ourselves to the task of nation building. I would like to thank all the stakeholders for keeping alive the memory of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, an iconic leader who not only served the nation, but played an important role in developing the education system in independent India. As a tribute to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, we plan to organize the National Education Day lecture on an annual basis. I once again extend my gratitude to Professor C. Rajkumar for delivering a scintillating and an inspiring lecture, and to Professor INDU SHAHANI and Dr. ASHWIN Fernandes and Dr. MOUSUMI MUKHERJEE for their invaluable remarks and everyone who attended the program. Before I end, I would also like to sincerely thank the team JGU for their support in organizing the lecture. Thank you all once again.